luxury star-cruiser Varelli, pride of the Valari Empire, tore through space like a silver arrow, elegant, powerful, and untouchable ore. So it seemed, until the raiders came. They struck like shadows, fast and merciless, disabling the ships, shields, and engines before anyone could scream. Explosions ripped through the corridors. Panic flooded the decks. Princess Lysira Valari, cloaked in silken duty, was dragged to the escape pods by her guards. One by one, they fell protecting her, and with blood on her gown and fire behind her, she launched into the void. Her pod spiraled down to Dartha 7, a wild and uncharted planet wrapped in storms and old war warnings. The crash was brutal. Metal screamed, trees shattered, and when the smoke cleared, Lysira lay inside a shattered pod, her leg twisted and bleeding, her regal mask cracked by fear. Hours passed. The jungle outside hissed with life's strange howls, fluttering wings, and unseen things moving through the thick underbrush. She tried to crawl, but darkness came first. When she opened her eyes again, the sky was dim, and something loomed above her two legs, a human face, hardened eyes. "You're lucky I found you before they did," he said, lifting her like she weighed nothing. Jason Holt, a man who had chosen exile after the war, had lived 10 years on this planet, alone and forgotten. He didn't ask questions at first. He took her to a hidden shelter built from crashed ships and stubborn survival. Lysira tried to act proud, even as the pain made her breath catch. Holt cleaned her wounds, gave her food, and stayed quiet. T watched him with suspicion. To her, humans were supposed to be chaotic and simple, not calm and sharp like him. But he had a scar across his jaw and a 1,000-yard stare he'd seen war, and maybe too much of it. When night fell, the jungle came alive. Lysira heard growls circling them. Holt moved quickly, arming traps, scanning the perimeter. He gave her a pulse pistol and showed her how to use it. "You ever shot one before?" he asked. "Liet?" "Training targets," she admitted. He nodded, like he expected as much. The first attack came just before dawn. 6-legged beasts with claws like razors. They burst from the trees, screeching. Holt fired like lightning. Lysira froze at first, then raised her pistol and fired one clean shot. The beast fell. "Nice shot," he said, reloading. For a moment, she felt something strange respect from a human. After the fight, as the sun broke through the canopy, Lysira finally asked, "Why did you help me?" Jason stared at the horizon. "Because someone has to." That night, while fixing the communication panel, he told her he once served in the Terran Defense Force, fought against her people, watched friends die. She expected anger or blame, but he showed none. "War teaches you one thing," he said. "Everyone bleeds the same." As days passed, Lysira began to see him not as an enemy, but as a man with a code. When he hunted, he shared. When she was afraid, he never mocked her. And when the second crash came, another pod, this time full of Valari bounty hunters, Jason didn't ask if she wanted to run. He just picked up his rifle. "We move at dusk," he said. T fled through thick jungle, across old ruins and rivers glowing with bioluminescent light. The bounty hunters followed, fast and merciless. One night, hiding in a cave, Lysira whispered, "You don't even know who I really am." Jason gave a tired smile. "I figured you were important. Doesn't change anything." And it didn't. He fought for her as if she were worth the fight, not because of her title, but because she was someone in need. When they finally escaped the hunters, using an ancient Valari distress beacon, Lysira stood beside him, breathless and bruised, and asked, "Why didn't you leave me?" Jason looked at her then, not as a princess, but as someone who had survived the fire. "Because maybe I'm tired of watching people like you and me be just pieces on someone else's board." And for the first time in her life, Lysira felt not like royalty, but like a person. The jungle of Dartha 7 stretched far and endless around them, thick with alien vines and glowing plants that lit their path like stars fallen to earth. And as Lysira followed behind Jason through the overgrown trail, she realized the fear inside her was no longer about beasts or bounty hunters. It was about the future. The kind that shifted with every step they took together, deeper into the wild. Her legs still ached, but it had healed enough for her to walk with only a slight limp, and she no longer needed his help to stand, though part of her still welcomed it. Jason moved ahead silently, checking for traps, scanning for movement, never careless, always sharp. He wasn't just a survivor. He was someone who had chosen this exile, someone who had walked away from a galaxy that had asked too much of him. She wanted to ask why, but she kept silent, afraid the answer might be heavier than she was ready to carry. For now, they had one goal: reach the observatory ruins deep in the valley. It's an ancient structure built during the first exploration era, long before either of their species claimed the stars. There, Jason said, was an old beacon, outdated, but strong enough to send a long-range distress signal if they repaired it. They had to be careful. The bounty hunters who had landed were still out there, searching with drones, scanning heat trails. Every movement through the underbrush risked a trace. Jason was cautious, but not slow. He had a way of moving like he knew every step before it happened. Lysira tried to match him, but the jungle still felt like it wanted to swallow her. Her royal training in politics, language, and ceremony was useless here. What kept her moving was something else, something she hadn't known she had: the will to survive, and the strange, growing feeling that she didn't want to leave this man behind. After 3 days of careful travel, they reached the cliffside that overlooked the ruins. From above, the observatory looked like a shattered dome of stone and metal, half covered in moss and vines. But beneath it was still power, still memory, still a signal that could scream into space. They descended slowly, quietly. Jason disabled 2 perimeter mines. Clearly, the bounty hunters had been here already, but hadn't managed to power the place. As they entered the main chamber, the air grew cooler. Screens flickered, long dead. Lights glowed faintly under Jason's touch. Lysira moved to a central console, her fingers dancing across the interface. The language was ancient, but she recognized it. Together, they brought the system online. A slow hum filled the air, and, for a second, Lysira felt something like hope. But it didn't last. The beacon required a direct frequency code. Jason handed her a small metal plate from his pack, something half buried in dirt and time. She inserted it, and the console lit up, brighter this time, and began to send. A signal shot into the sky, blinking across the black, bouncing between satellites and stars. Someone would hear it. Tia. Someone would come. That night, they stayed hidden in the ruins, teaning up camp beneath the broken dome, where stars shone through gaps in the ceiling. Jason made a fire using a small burner and gave her dried meat and fruit. She didn't ask what animal it came from. They sat close, not touching, but closer than before. "Why are you here, really?" Lysira finally asked, her voice low. Jason stared at the fire. "War," he said simply. "I fought. I believed. Then I saw what belief does when it gets twisted. I lost people, so I came here, where belief doesn't matter." She looked at him, at the man who had risked his life for her. A stranger. "You don't seem like someone who stopped believing." He gave a short laugh. "Okay, maybe I just started believing in different things." C wanted to ask more, but a sudden chirp from the console interrupted them. The beacon had received a reply, not from the Valari, from humans, a Terran. Resistance. They were closer than she thought possible. A rebel cell had picked up the signal and was preparing to send a ship. Lysira read the message, heart pounding. "They know who I am," she said. Jason raised an eyebrow. That bad? No, she whispered. That's the part that scares me. We want to talk. She showed him the reply. The Terrans believed she might be a key to peace, or, at least change someone high enough to shake the throne from inside. It made her stomach twist. She hadn't come to start a revolution. She just wanted to live. But now, the galaxy was watching. The next morning, Jason went to scout the area while she tried to process everything. Hours passed. She grew restless. Then she heard the worry sound drones. Fast, precise. She ducked beneath the console, heart racing. Through a crack in the wall, she saw the smooth curve of a Valkyrie hunter ship landing nearby. Day had tracked the signal too. She grabbed a pistol and ran. In the trees, she found Jason pinned behind a rock, trading fire with 2 hunters. Took you long enough, he called as she dropped beside him. You started without me, she answered, firing once and hitting a drone clean through its eye. They fought together, fluid and sharp. The hunters retreated, not expecting resistance. Jason motioned for her to move. They sprinted back to the observatory, only to find more of them already descending through the ceiling. Jason tossed a flash bomb, grabbed Lysira's hand, and pulled her through a side tunnel. They emerged into an old launch chamber. Back up. Plan? She asked. Not yet, he said. But we're making one now. He activated the chamber controls, and a long-buried transport pod hissed to life. It was old, but functional. We ride this to the valley, then we meet your rebels. They're not mine, she said, but even as she said it, she wasn't sure anymore. They launched just as the bounty hunters broke through the tunnel behind them. The pod raced through the underground rail, shooting through darkness like a bullet. When it stopped, they were far from the ruins, deep in the valley. A human ship hovered low nearby, a ramp lowered. They ran. A voice called out from the ship's speaker Tehran accent, clear and urgent. Lysira, Valkyrie, we've been waiting for you. She stopped at the edge of the ramp. Jason turned to look at her. She looked back at the jungle, the ruins, the sky. Then she looked at him. You could have left me, she said. You didn't. Didn't feel right, he said. I don't know what's next, she admitted. You don't have to, he said. Just don't let someone else decide it for you. She took a deep breath, stepped onto the ship, and pulled him with her. As the ramp closed and the engines lifted them into the sky, Lysira watched the stars blur past the window. She didn't know what would happen. She didn't know if the galaxy would change. But she knew one thing: she wasn't alone anymore. And somehow, that changed everything. The ship hummed through deep space, carrying Lysira and Jason far from Dartha 7, but not away from danger. For the moment, the stars stretched around them. She felt a pressure in her chest that hadn't been there before. Too many eyes would be watching now, both human and Valkyrie, and she was no longer just a lost princess or a refugee, but something more, something uncertain and sharp, a piece on a board she no longer wanted to play on. And Jason, ever silent beside her, said nothing of her fear, but remained close, a steady presence in a galaxy about to shake. They were led through long metal halls inside the rebel cruiser, sleek but battered. Its crew, sharp-eyed and quiet, treating her with both suspicion and hope. It frightened her more than hatred ever could. And as they entered the command chamber, she was greeted not by a general or an admiral, but by a woman named Commander Reyna, tall, stern, eyes dark with sleeplessness, who simply said, "You're not what we expected." And Lysira, with Jason beside her, replied, "Neither are you." Starting a conversation that would not end quickly, for Reyna showed her intercepted Valkyrie transmissions. Her mother, the Empress, had declared her lost. A state funeral already held, but beneath the grief lay cold calculation. Akana Lysira understood immediately. She had been erased, not mourned, her legacy cut clean as if she had never lived. And Reyna told her the rebellion had always believed the empire would break from inside. Not from bombs, but from bloodlines. And now, here she was, proof that cracks existed in royal gold. They asked her what she wanted, and Lysira didn't have an answer. Not then, not while memories of flames and gunfire still burned behind her eyes, but she knew she didn't want to be used again. Not by rebels, not by royals. And when she said that, Jason gave the smallest nod like he understood without needing more words. And so they stayed, not as prisoners, but not quite free either, moving through the ship like ghosts caught between past and future, training with rebel crews, learning human tactics, and every night Lysira would sit by a window and stare at the stars, wondering which one her mother watched from, and whether she missed her or feared her return. Time passed quickly in the dark, and soon came whispers of a summit, a secret meeting between rebel leaders and a fringe group of Valyri nobles, those who had grown tired of the Empress's cold rule, and Lysira was asked to attend, not as royalty, but as someone who had seen both sides, lived both stories, and though fear twisted her gut, she agreed, knowing the galaxy would never wait for her to be ready. The summit was to be held on a small moon called Carol 9. It was cold and gray, once a mining colony, now hollowed and dead. It's the perfect place for quiet meetings, and as they landed, Jason handed her a pulse pistol, just in case, though they were meant to be unarmed, and she took it without question, the metal warm in her hand from his touch. Inside the dome-shaped outpost, they found others already waiting, human commanders, exiled Valyri dukes, and a few strange figures who claimed loyalty to neither side, but hoped to profit from whatever came next. And as the doors sealed behind them, Lysira felt the weight of 1,000 choices pressed down, each face in the room carrying its own war, its own scars, but none as fresh as hers. They began with quiet introductions, sharp questions, subtle threats, and Lysira watched as her presence silenced arguments, her voice carrying a power she hadn't expected, not from her title, but from the truth in her story, how she had nearly died, how Jason had saved her, how the Empire had erased her as easily as breathing. And for a while, it seemed hope might rise in that cold dome, a fragile bridge forming between sides that had never spoken without weapons in hand. But peace is a dangerous thing, and someone always fears it more than war, and that fear took shape in the form of an explosion, small, quick, deadly. The light shattered, alarms screamed, and in the chaos, Lysira was thrown back, ears ringing, smoke filling her lungs. And through it all, she heard Jason shouting her name, dragging her behind cover, his weapon drawn, eyes scanning the room like a predator. And when the lights flickered back on, they saw the truth. One of the nobles was dead, 2 rebels bleeding, and the rest frozen with shock and fear. And worse still, the doors were sealed, traps sprung from within, not from outside, meaning someone inside the room had planned it. Suspicion spread like fire, each side accusing the other. And Lysira knew that if she didn't speak now, everything they'd tried to build would crumble before it began. So she stood, shaking but alive, and said, "This was never about peace, not for all of us." Her voice, cutting through the air like a blade, she looked to the one man who hadn't spoken since the blast, a quiet Valyri lord, with 2 still hands and 2 clean robes. And as Jason stepped beside her, pistol aimed low, the man rose and smiled, not in surprise, but in surrender, as if he'd always known it would end this way. He confessed, but not with shame. He spoke of loyalty to the Empress, of purging weakness, of silencing those who dared to speak of change. And as he reached for a hidden detonator, Jason shot first, clean and fast, and the man fell, the device clattering harmlessly away. Silence returned, heavy and full of breath not yet taken. And when it broke, it was not with fear, but with resolve. For now, the danger was real, not whispered. In the room, no longer argued, but agreed. If they were to survive, if anything was to change, they had to act. And Lysira, shaken and covered in dust, was asked to lead, not because of her title, but because she had stood when no one else had. And though she wanted to say no, to return to silence and shadows, she looked at Jason, saw no pressure in his gaze, only quiet trust, and she said, "I will help you, but not as your queen, only as one who wants to stop the bleeding." And they accepted it, and plans were made, fast and sharp, for the rebellion was no longer just talk, no longer whispers, it was real, and it had found its voice in the girl the stars tried to forget, in the man who had walked away from war and found it again in her shadow. And as they returned to the ship, heading into darker space, Lysira felt something inside her shift, not fear, but fire. The stars outside the rebel cruiser were distant and silent, but inside the ship, tension pressed against every wall like unseen gravity, and Lysira could feel it in her bones. The way the crew moved faster, the way conversations fell quiet when her name was mentioned, and even though she had stood at the summit, even though she had spoken when everyone else froze, she knew that her path was only beginning, not ending, because war did not wait for speeches to bloom into peace. And now a message had arrived, a direct communication passing through deep space channels, encrypted but unmistakable. The Empress had spoken, and her words were cold and sharp as ever. "Return to me, alone and unarmed, or I will consider your rebellion a declaration of war against the throne." And though the message had been meant for her, everyone had heard it, and now silence lingered in every corridor. Not from doubt, but from the weight of the decision only she could make. And Jason, standing with her in the dim glow of the strategy chamber, didn't tell her what to do, didn't urge her to run or stay, only said, "Whatever choice you make, I'll be right behind you." And somehow that meant more than any army's oath. The rebel leaders argued among themselves. Some said she should go, pretend to surrender, spy from within. Others called it a trap, too obvious to walk into. And a few, like Reyna, believed the Empress was testing her, not to destroy her, but to see how much power she truly held outside the palace. For a ruler does not strike down a threat until she knows whether the blade will cut both ways. Lysira listened to them all, but in her heart, a storm had begun to build, not anger, but something deeper, a need to face what she had fled, to look her mother in the eye and ask why love had turned to exile, why she had been declared dead, not with sorrow, but strategy. In the end, she chose to go, but not alone, and not unarmed, not in body, but in spirit, for Jason would be her shadow, hidden aboard the small shuttle they sent toward the Valerie capital, and her words would be her shield. The flight was long and quiet, every light flickering like a heartbeat. And as the capital planet came into view, its shining rings and glowing towers rising like dreams from the clouds, Lysira remembered her childhood gold halls, silver servants, gardens that stretched for miles, and yet none of it had ever made her feel truly free. Not like the wild skies of Dartha 7, not like the fire in her chest when she had stood beside Jason with nothing but her voice. The shuttle was guided to land on a private pad, and as she stepped out, the guards bowed low, their faces unreadable, not friends, not enemies, only watchers. Hey, she walked among them like a ghost returned to its grave, her footsteps echoing through halls that had once known her laughter, her tears, and finally, at the heart of the palace, the doors opened, and the Empress stood, waiting tall, unbending, dressed in black, woven with stars, her crown more a blade than a jewel, and her eyes, cold and bright, locked on Lysira without warmth or hate, only calculation. They did not embrace, they did not greet, they simply stood. Two storms meeting at the center of a silent world. And then the Empress spoke, her voice like frost. "So my daughter returns, but not as heir, only a symbol, waving banners you barely understand. And Lycera replied, steady and calm, I did not return to kneel. And with that, the game began. They sat across from each other in the throne chamber. No guards, no advisors, only words as weapons. And the Empress questioned her about the rebellion, about the summit, about Jason, and Lycera answered with truths that stung, telling her of the people's hunger, their fear, their growing doubt in the Empire's perfection. And the Empress listened, face unreadable, then said, you speak of rebellion as if it is new. I crushed 5 before you were born. And Lycera asked, then why have you not crushed this one? And the silence that followed was heavy with something unspoken. Finally, the Empress stood, and her voice turned sharp. I offer you one chance to span the rebellion. Bring me the traitors, and you will have your title restored, your name cleared, your future secured. But Lycera shook her head, not out of pride, but out of truth, and said, you erased me because I wanted to help, not harm. And now you offer safety in return for silence. I can't accept that. And the Empress's eyes narrowed, not with rage, but with recognition, as if seeing something she hadn't expected. And she said, then you are no longer Valari, and turned away, giving a single nod. And Lycera understood the choice had been made. Jason, hidden within the shuttle, had intercepted a silent order, execution, to be carried out quietly, without spectacle, a final severing of the thread between mother and daughter. But Lycera had planned for this, and as she walked back through the palace, guards surrounding her, she reached into the sleeve of her gown and triggered the signal of pulse sent to a rebel ship in high orbit, cloaked and waiting. Explosions rocked the sky within minutes, not to destroy, but to distract. And in the chaos, Jason emerged from the shadows, blaster drawn, cutting a path to her side. They ran through fire and marble, through memories and betrayal, and at the last turn, Lycera paused, looked back at the throne room, not with regret, but with resolve, and whispered, I loved you once, but now I will stop you. Then fled into the light of the burning skyline. The rebel ship dropped fast, opened its ramp, and they leaped aboard, just as fighters streaked past, and as the planet fell behind them, growing smaller with each second, Lycera sank into a chair, heart pounding, eyes burning, and Jason sat beside her, silent, steady, the only thing that hadn't turned to ash. And as the stars opened again around them, she knew there would be no more ultimatums, only war. And the girl once called Princess would now become something else entirely. The stars had never seemed so cold, nor the silence of deep space so heavy. As Lycera sat in the darkened chamber of the rebel flagship, her heart a storm of doubt and defiance, for though she had escaped the palace with her life, she had left something behind that no ship could. Carry her bloodline, her crown, and the last thread connecting her to a mother who now saw her as a traitor. The Empress had declared her a criminal, a threat to the Valari throne, and placed a price on her head so high that bounty hunters now prowled every known system, hunting not just her, but anyone who gave her shelter. And though the rebellion stood by her, cracks had begun to show, whispers rising in hidden corners about whether she was truly one of them or still a piece of the Empire's game, and so, to silence doubt and unite their cause, the Rebel Council decided on something no one expected: a trial, one that would be broadcast across neutral space, where both human and Valari citizens could watch and decide for themselves whether Lycera was a fallen princess seeking justice or a crownless usurper hiding behind rebellion. And when she was told of this plan, she did not argue, for she had known all along that standing against her mother would cost more than just loyalty, would cost her identity, and maybe even her name. The trial was set aboard the Bastion, a mobile station drifting on the edge of a truce zone, its interior transformed into a great hall, dark and metallic, with banners from both rebel factions and neutral planets hanging like ghosts above the watchers, and Jason stood beside her, as always, quiet but ready. His presence, a quiet fire that held her together when the weight of the galaxy felt too much. And though he would not speak during the trial, his eyes would never leave hers, as if silently reminding her that truth, once spoken, could change the stars. When the trial began, a silence fell over the galaxy. Feeds tuned in from mining colonies, trade ships, palace worlds, and rebel outposts, all watching the same thing. Girl once called royal, now standing in chains of her own choosing, not to beg forgiveness, but to speak truth. In the council, composed of human generals, exiled Valari scholars, and leaders from broken systems, began by asking one question: "Who are you, Lysira of the House Vareth?" And for a moment, she said nothing, letting the silence settle before answering. "I am the daughter of the Empress, born into power I never wanted, trained to rule an empire that kills its own people, can't cast aside when I tried to change it." And her words echoed across the hall like a challenge. The prosecutors, hard men and women who had lost family to the empire, pressed her with questions, showing footage of palace feasts while border worlds starved, presenting documents signed in her name during her youth, orders for control and silence. And she did not deny them, did not excuse herself, only said, "I was part of the machine, but I did not build it. And when I saw what it was, I walked away." And some scoffed, calling it convenient, but others listened, watched her eyes, and saw no lie in them. Witnesses were called rebels who had fought beside her, soldiers from Dartha 7 who remembered her leading evacuations, and even one Valari noble, now in exile, who told the council how Lysira had once tried to end a cruel blockade with words alone, only to be overruled by the Empress herself. And as these stories grew, too did the weight of her presence, not as a symbol, but as a person who had chosen pain over privilege. Still, the harshest moment came when a survivor from a rebel colony bombed by the Empire stood and demanded, "Why didn't you stop them sooner?" Head, Lysira, voice shaking but firm, said, "Because I was afraid, and because I thought love could change the crown. I was wrong." And the silence after that was not judgment, but sorrow. Outside the chamber, unrest brewed, with Empire agents trying to sabotage the broadcast, mercenaries lurking near the edges of space, and even rebel factions disagreeing on whether the trial should continue. But within the hall, a strange calm began to form, as if the very act of listening, of witnessing her words without interruption, was forging something new. On the final day, she was allowed to speak freely, and Lysira stood tall before the council, her voice clear. "I do not ask for a throne, and I do not ask for forgiveness. I ask only that you believe what you have seen, and know that I will not stop fighting until every voice the Empire silenced is heard again." And when she finished, the hall did not erupt, nor did it fall apart, simply breathed, as if the galaxy itself had paused to think. The vote was held in silence, each council member placing their decision into a sealed crystal. And as the results were revealed, 12 in favor of her innocence, 2 undecided, 1 opposed, Lysira felt something shift. Not in the room, but in the stars beyond, as if history had cracked open just enough to let something new through. The chains were removed, not with ceremony, but with quiet respect. And Jason was the first to step forward, not to cheer, but to take her hand. And in that moment, Lysira realized this trial had never been about guilt or proof. It had been about showing the galaxy that change could have a face, and that face did not need to be perfect, only brave. As they left the bastion, messages flooded in from systems long silent support, questions, offers of alliance, and Lysira knew that the war still waited ahead. Something greater had been born from that hall. Not a queen, not a martyr, but a leader who had chosen truth over legacy and the galaxy, it seemed, was finally ready to listen. The war did not end with the trial, but it changed direction like a storm shifting across the stars. And as Lysira stood aboard the rebel flagship, staring into the cold beauty of the galaxy, she knew that everything had led to this moment, the fall of Dartha 7, her mother's ultimatum, the trial before the galaxy, and now the final battle that would either break the Empire or see her name buried beneath its ruins. Beside her stood Jason, silent and steady as always. Not just a human who had saved her from death, but the one who reminded her who she truly was when all the worlds called her traitor. And now, the two of them were about to face the most dangerous day of their lives, because the rebellion had discovered that the Empress was moving her fleet, gathering her most loyal commanders at a hidden stronghold near the edge of the Red Sector, a place once thought abandoned after a failed colony, burned long ago, but now revealed to be a secret command post. And it was here, the rebel spies reported, that the Empress would either unleash a weapon to end the rebellion or call a final summit to demand total surrender. Lysira had no doubts left her mother would not offer peace, not anymore, and so she and Jason prepared a mission. One last strike, not to destroy, but to confront. To end this war, not with bombs, but with truth sharp enough to split the crown. The plan was dangerous, maybe foolish, but it was the only way to stop more death. And so Lysira, Jason, and a small team of trusted fighters boarded a stealth cruiser, its hull black as space, and set course for the Red Sector under full cloak, slipping past sensor nets and patrols until the stronghold loomed like a shadowed mountain on a dead planet below, its towers glowing faintly, its defenses strangely quiet. Something about it felt wrong to still. Too easy, and as they landed in a hidden canyon and crept through ancient tunnels beneath the surface, Lysira's heart beat faster, not with fear, but with a strange calm, as if fate had already chosen her path and now waited to see whether she would follow it to the end. They breached the lower levels and moved upward, disabling silent guards with stun rounds, bypassing doors with old codes only Lysira remembered, and finally reached the command spire, where the Empress waited, alone, seated on a throne of black crystal beneath a ceiling of flickering stars, her eyes already locked on Lysira, as if she had known she would come all along. Jason raised his weapon, but Lysira stopped him, stepping forward as the Empress rose, tall and cold, her voice sharp. And tired, you bring war to my doorstep and still expect me to call you daughter. To which Lysira replied, you stopped being my mother the day you silenced the truth, okay? And in that moment, time seemed to freeze, the fate of empires hanging in the space between their words. The Empress did not strike. Not yet. She gestured, and hidden screens lit up, showing rebel fleets gathering, Empire cruisers rising to meet them. The battle beginning even as they stood there, but neither moved to join it, for their war was not fought with ships, not today. The Empress stepped forward and asked, do you think they'll follow you, these humans, these exiles? You wear rebellion like a crown, but crowns burn, and Lysira replied, then let it burn, so something better can rise. And with that, the Empress drew a blade of pure light from her side, slow and deliberate, offering it hilt first to Lysira, a final test without words, and Lysira stared at it, knowing that to take it meant accepting both the power and the cost. And after a long breath, she reached out not for the blade, but for Jason's hand, and said, no, I will not rule alone. Not like you did. And in that moment, something cracked behind the Empress's eyes, not defeat, but recognition, as if some long-hidden part of her remembered what it meant to hope. A sound echoed through the tower alarms, shouting, footsteps, and rebel forces burst in. Weapons raised, but froze at the sight of Lysira, standing tall with Jason at her side, and the Empress standing motionless, her weapon lowered. What followed was not a battle, but a silence broken by the weight of what could have been and what had now become, because Lysira did not take the throne by force. And she did not strike her mother down, but she spoke in front of cameras and soldiers and enemies, saying, "The empire as we knew it is over. What rises next will be led, not by blood, but by choice." And the words spread across space faster than fire, reaching planets too tired to fight and leaders too afraid to speak. And something shifted, not all at once, but slowly, as systems once loyal to the throne declared neutrality. Commanders refused orders, and even within the palace, servants and guards began to lay down their weapons, unsure but willing to believe that maybe, just maybe, the galaxy did not need fear to hold it together. The Empress did not resist. She walked away, not as ruler, but as mother no longer needed, and Lysira let her go. For the war was not about vengeance, but change, and change had already begun. In the days that followed, a new assembly formed, not an empire, not a republic, but a gathering of worlds. Human and Valari and others, all equal, and at its heart stood Lysira. Not as Empress, but as speaker, her crown buried deep in the soil of Dartha 7, where the rebellion had first begun. And beside her always stood Jason, the human who had never left her side, who had loved her, not for what she was, but for who she chose to be. And though many still struggled, and not all battles were over, the stars now whispered a different kind of story, not of rulers and rebels, but of people who dared to stand together, and of a girl who once was princess, but became something greater, with a human beside the throne.